Marcus, and I'm Pauline Graivier. I'm the interviewer, and the videographer is Ruth Andrus. And the date today is March the 15th, 2012, and here is Anita Goldman Marcus, who is one of the real icons of Jewish women in Dallas. So, Anita, would you begin by telling us something about your upbringing in Oak Cliff and the family that you came from?
If you want to start with the family, my father came to Dallas in 1911 with a $5 gold piece in his purse, no English, worked 20 hours in his uncle's business, slept in the barn, and then he became his owner of his own business and the baking business, which the family was in, he and his older brother, Julius Goldman, who died young. And he was one of 8 children. He brought them all over. The story was, I said, how did you manage to save the money? He says, I spent 25 cents a week. I walked downtown and went to the Queen Theater. And that's all I did for amusement. So they came over.
That was 1911.
11. He was the first. We just celebrated our 100th anniversary with a big event.
From where did they come?
My father came from Russia. My mother came as a much younger child from Poland. I don't know a whole lot about family history. She really didn't. And they met in Dallas and married. And I was the third of 4 children. And we lived first in South Dallas, but we moved to Oak Cliff at an early age. And my mother was concerned that there were 3 or 4 Jewish families in all of Oak Cliff. Let me explain Oak Cliff as it was then. Dallas had about 300,000 people in it at the time. 100,000 lived across the Trinity in Oak Cliff. It was fundamentalist Baptist, very conservative. And some Jews who had been here a long time came to my father and said, don't move there, don't start a business there. You'll increase anti-Semitism. And within 2 years, he had won the award in Oak Cliff for Outstanding Community Service and was unofficially the mayor of Oak Cliff. And I think that, I'm telling you this story because I think it's important to the influence on my own life. I loved going to Sunset High School. I was the only Jewish student there. Everybody was wonderful. I did all the sort of things you do in high school, with the honoraries and the fun. And then I went to SMU for a while.
What about dating in
We didn't really date. We had little groups of people that went together. Does anybody remember Dr. Warren T. White, W.T. White?
Sure.
Well, his son went to school with me. We graduated together. And we did speech tournaments together. He was better. He debated. I did what was called declamation. It was just a lot of fun. I had several girlfriends that stayed girlfriends with me for a long time now. At our age, I have one left.
It's hard.
So, that was an interesting neighborhood. Around the corner was the president of the gas company, and around Marydale Corner, which they changed the name of, I think, was the president of the electric company. And behind us, I mentioned my good friend, she was the daughter of the district attorney, and we had about 4 judges.
That's a very
it was an interesting
highly educated neighborhood. What about you were going to Shereth Israel?
Yeah, every Sunday, we drove there. My father drove us there. And I went to Shereth Israel Sunday School, which I have to confess was not a great inspiration to me at the time. It was not very well organized, and it was more to be endured than enjoyed. So, but anyhow, they were nice people, and we all tried hard. And after confirmation, I gave up going to Sunday school. But we stayed closely aligned to Shereth Israel. My grandfather was a Talmudic scholar, and when the boys, told him, you retire, and you go and walk to shul every day, and he led these groups and taught Talmud and discussions, and he was happy as a lark. And my mother's family the Goodman, she was next to the youngest of a family of 7, the Goodmans, and she was much younger than the others. And she and her brother Max Goodman were very close, as was Simon Goodman, Francis Goodman Coleman's mother. Aunt Sophie was a wonderful person too. And so we had a very large extended
family, right?
And while Mother was alive, she used to entertain them all at any party she ever gave, she did that fairly consistently all during the year. And I had a very happy childhood, to tell you the truth. I was sorry I wasn't beautiful. I had all my hang-ups. And I wanted to be a foreign correspondent after seeing a movie called Arise My Love. But thank God I didn't. And after SMU, as I said, I went to the University of California at Berkeley, where I graduated in 1947, if you can believe it.
Hard to
majoring in English.
You majored in English.
Very practical.
And then after
college? I did some volunteer work while I was a youth. Red Cross, Office of Civilian Defense. I went weekly to Parkland Hospital to be what was called a dietitian's aide. A bunch of stuff. Campfire Girl. I belonged to the Temple group. And what was her name, Roz? Anyhow, she married the Reformed rabbi in Houston. Terrific woman, Roz.
I know exactly who you mean, Rochelle Kahn.
Is it Rochelle or Rosalind?
Rochelle. Because she was a good friend of my mother's.
Oh, really? Mm-hmm. Well, that's a nice thing, too, about Dallas. The Jewish community was small enough that if you didn't know anyone, you knew who they were. And my father was so active in civic work and community work, and he was president of the Oak Cliff Chamber of Commerce and of the congregation, Sheriff Israel. And Lyndon Johnson, he had correspondence, and he was befriended with some of the people who worked for him in lowly positions. He never knew a stranger, he just loved everyone.
A wonderful influence.
He was really a marvelous man. And my mother was patient and quiet and dedicated to her family.
And so after college, you're back in Dallas, and you were volunteering.
Well, not very much. I got married to Charles, whom I met on a blind date. His cousin married my cousin. All this kind of stuff goes on, His cousin was from Memphis, Rita Rubenstein, and my cousin was Marvin Rubenstein. And we were introduced at lunch because I had a date that night. I couldn't go out. He was on his way to California. And it was not instant because we didn't marry till 4 years later. But I had a very good time, to tell you the truth. I didn't do as much volunteer work then, to be honest. But I think I worked on UJA and do things like that. But then immediately after we married, we lost my mother and my sister, both within 10 days, 19 days of each other. And things were a little different. Should I stop talking?
No, you're doing wonderfully.
So then let's see. I've never had the opportunity. Nobody ever wanted to listen to this before.
It's a wonderful opportunity.
So let's see.
So you got married, and did you and Charles, did you follow him to California, or did you come
No, he
back?
moved to Dallas to court me. That's why it took so long. No, he was just going to California to visit. Actually, he went to practice law in Chicago and then moved down to Texas. But he had a lot of friends in Texas because he was a World War II veteran and was stationed at Camp Fannin in Texas and fought in all those battles in Africa and Italy. And fought in them as a lieutenant or captain, I think he was. And stayed alive during the worst of them in France. And then when he was wounded so badly the last time that was the end of his.
What happened?
Still affects him, huh?
What happened to him?
Landmine. No, the fellow next to him, I don't know if he were killed or what, but Charles had a lot of problems from that. So anyhow, he looks okay, doesn't he?
So he came here to practice law, and you were married.
And as far as the family, and Fraser was born, our oldest, 2 years later. And I was already involved in the National Council of Jewish Women. And that's more or less was my volunteer life for a long time.
Well, you're one of the icons of the National Council of Jewish Women nationally as well as locally.
Well, yes, thank you, but that was a while ago. I was president of the local section.
Well, we'd like to hear about that.
And I was president of the 1st Southern District, which is 16, and on the national board. But the most fun thing I did was the public affairs chair for the state of Texas. I was always interested in advocacy. And that's another thing. While I was growing up, when Mother had people over for dinner or whatever, I never sat with the women afterwards. I always did with the men, because I thought they were a lot more interesting. They talked about business and politics, and the women didn't talk about things like that. And I was very much interested. And Dad knew so many politicians and was so active in behind the scenes, you might say. I know they used to ask her to run for city council. He refused to do it. But he sort of named people that did. And, in the legislature, I remember I had autographs and messages from every governor up till President Smith. By then he was inactive. They just sort of, and senators, they were, very nice.
He was influential, is what you're saying, very influential.
He did a lot of things, and he was interested in people and the good government. And he had a heart.
He sounds like a remarkable person. I wish I'd known.
He really was. So was my mother. No one ever talks about the mothers because they're in the background.
I'd like to explore more about this advocacy program that you mentioned.
Well, that's always been the most interest to me. And actually, council, which I'll refer, they call it NCJW now, so I'll be modern. NCJW really developed and organized that for me. In study groups, which I chaired, and the vice presidency, and up the ladder. In those days, there were people sort of competing for things to do, and no longer the way. Volunteers took their commitment as really as their job, their profession. And we all sit around the old timers and say they don't ever do it anymore. They're playing tennis, they're doing this. They go to every PTA meeting, but they don't do anything for anybody else's children. And we complain like old fogies. But we did do that. It was a different world.
Tell us an example of the advocacy program.
Well, I remember Betty Miller and I must have chaired several of these community-wide forums, which one of them was led to she didn't chair that one, I did with.
Who was that you mentioned?
Betty Miller.
Betty Miller.
The one that started me on the way to what I did as professionally was, Myra Fisher was my co-chair. But Betty Miller, way back, we did a program called Women on the Move. And we involved Church Women United, the Catholic women, they organized groups of Negro women, as they were called then. And various sorts of groups. And it was the first time they had ever sat at the same tables in Temple, Emmanuel. That's true.
Really? And did you give people topics to?
Oh yeah, we were talking about unemployment as it affected women and consumer. There was no consumer education at that time. We really organized a group of women who went throughout the city comparing prices and reporting, and then in some of the retail stores. And we learned a lot. If you're poor, they stepped on you. So out of that came some project, but the one that interested me the most. And then I did work in child care. I did get an award for that. I never looked for awards. I came in from out of the blue from another.
I know. And I understand that it's difficult to talk about yourself that way, but we would, if you don't mind, would you give us an idea of some of the awards that you've...
Well, let's see. The one that means the most to me was the Hannah G. Solomon Award from NCJW.
Yes.
Which is almost an annual recognition. And
that is for service?
Yeah, well, for a lot of service.
Extraordinary service.
And then let's see, what else did I get? The Laurel Award. What was that AAUW? I don't remember what they called it.
A lot of people don't know what that Laura Award is, would you?
Didn't know where it came from, to tell you the truth. Anyhow,
You were
there was one
nominated.
from the Child Care Project, which I thought was silly. Margaret Cohn's organization for young children. They came. And all I did was when the council came and says, we got to start a daycare center. And so I went and looked at them. I says, we can't afford to start a daycare center. If you go visit these places, these people don't know what they're doing with the children. They just sit there. We need to improve the quality of care these children are getting. And Madeline Mandel and the late Sonia Beveride were invaluable in that field because they ran model child care centers. And so we teamed up with Eastville College, and they gave courses to the women. Then I got the department of whatever it was called then, public service, public welfare, whatever it is. They changed the name, state agency. To mandate, they had to have the training. Mm-hmm. And it was wonderful because it improved their their view of themselves, their self-confidence, and helped some of them, I think, to do better lives and improve the quality, and brought the attention to. Now that program gets funded or not funded depending on who's governor, but I didn't think that was it was a council project. That wasn't really mine.
And that was a typical kind of a council project too, when someone there was
I thought the national mandate to start a daycare center was a little beyond a volunteer group. That's a very involved and expensive proposition.
Well, I think that's probably one of the best things about what you did is that you didn't always see that we had to do something different.
I got a little trouble over that from time to time, but people were very understanding. But the one that's in the 70s that became my field for the next dozen years was juvenile justice. And I have to thank Carl Flaxman, because we got together in the meeting and I says, if you want to touch juvenile justice, you have to do it on a state level, because they all insisted on local. And everyone had a lot of confidence in Carl Flaxman's judgment, and he's convinced them. I didn't know he was going to do the state, so we began this statewide program with agencies and volunteers and youth groups.
You said Carl Flaxman from that.
Well, he convinced the executive committee that we should do this, and I don't know if I made that clear.
I'm interested. Would you continue?
And so we had all these people there, and we found out some of the things that were really awful, like runaways were treated like criminals. I mean, if you quit your job and leave, they don't let you put you in jail. They treated what they call status offenders like criminals, which they weren't. They were running away from abuse, mostly. Anyhow, we put down what would you like to do afterwards. And almost everyone at the conference says we want to have a coalition. Then they all went home. So I went to all the different men who headed agencies and said, would you chair this? Oh no, we don't have time, you do it. And this was pretty consistent. And I had the vaguest idea how to start a statewide coalition. But it had so much good help. NCJW helped at first. After that, they, as their habit, their mandate, they pulled out. But Betty Miller individually stayed. She was president at the time. And, lo and behold, before I knew, we had the whole state organized. And I was traveling, and we took runaways and children in adult jails as our main issues. And, we worked with some legislature tours in the Senate and of course, with the agencies. And we had some very influential members on both political parties who were very helpful. And I must tell you, we changed the laws. We found a new agency. Now, not by ourselves, but they couldn't have done it without us. And then we started on juvenile probation and trying to get these children out of adult lockups. What made me mad very angry, I should say, is when I heard the story of this orphan who was sent to foster home. And he hit the foster parents and they locked him up in the adult city jail, along with the experienced criminals and drunks and drug addicts. And I said, well, he was thinking of a 16-year-old hulking kid. He was 7 years old.
7 years old.
In Montgomery County, Texas. And, you know, I was so angry, as you would if you'd never heard this story before.
No.
And the country was a different country then. Now there's so much violence and so much killing. I think people would shrug their shoulders. But then people were really concerned in the 70s. So that became our next issue. Then luckily, the head of the federal agency, the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, was a man named Ira Schwartz, who had been to Dallas and been on our initial program. And he had a mandate that if you don't take the children out of city jails to separate them from in juvenile detention facilities, you will lose your funding. So we had meanwhile helped create the Texas Juvenile Probation Commission. There was none before. If you wanted to be a probation officer, you had good character, and you were tired of taking garbage up, you were a probation officer. No qualifications whatsoever. So they began to have standards and run a good agency. Anyhow, the two of us traveled the state, and I was in more little towns than you ever want to hear. And eventually, all the children that were in adult city jails were removed. We had other issues, but that's more or less.
That's really remarkable. And you and Betty mostly did the
No, Betty was on the board.
I see.
She didn't do the advocacy, but she is a wonderful support and administrator.
Mm-hmm. So who would travel with you?
Well, my professional staff
I
traveled
see.
with me.
I see.
Once or twice the president came with me, but that's it. And we had different presidents. We were very lucky with that.
You really were a professional volunteer. I mean, this is
But
far more.
it was very hard, and
yes.
it just wore me out to the bone because I had understaffed and underfunded. Well, we got grants enough to keep going, but it was just draining.
And meanwhile, your family was growing up.
Well, they were already grown by then.
I
I started this when Carolyn went off to college. So I had no empty nest syndrome because I didn't have time.
Hardly.
Yeah.
Hardly.
But it was very hard. And after that, finally after 12 years, I was just worn out. And just, what's a word for that? Burnout, I think it is.
Were you able to hand that off?
Well, I wouldn't leave until I found someone who could do it. And she had been a director of an agency. She came. And she kept it going for about 6 more years, but it had changed. She wasn't able to get the volunteers. And also the people who were funding it wanted her to do professional workshops mainly. And that was not what we did, so the money more or less dried up. But we did accomplish some things, though. But then different administrations came in, and things slid back.
What would you like to see the volunteer world be like or turn into? I mean, here you are years as being far more than an ordinary volunteer, which is we need certainly, but you really took it to a very high degree of professionalism. What would you like to see now?
Well, I wish I could see people who believed in consistently volunteered in something they find rewarding, and that they do it consistently. I'll repeat that word, and to see it to an end or to a commitment of some length and duration. I think you don't see that so much anymore. People have busy lives. Young women have careers. They don't have domestic help. They're more involved with their little children, and I think that's the way it is. Mm-hmm. So it might be that we might have to think of shorter programs, charter projects, of duration that don't demand as much time, and take cognizance of their lifestyle now.
You know, you've touched on a lot of subjects there. I wonder whether we could.
I did some Jewish, volunteer stuff. I didn't have that in there. I was vice president of Jewish Family Service and served on the first Jewish Community Center when we used to meet in that little pool room. There was no center, and something called the vocational service which I was on, but that merged as it should have with Jewish Family Service. What else did I do? Well, I was always a life member of Cheryl Tisdale's Sisterhood, and I'm very fond of the League of Women Voters. I've been a member for over 50 years, maybe 55, and Women's Council is still a good advocacy group and good community service. I still like them.
Are you doing any work now? Any volunteer work now?
Well, not now. When after retired, I went on a city commission, City of Dallas, Human Resources, and I did 4 years volunteering at Vickery, Meadow when it first started, teaching English to.
Vickery Meadow, again, is
a learning center for adult, mostly women, but women and men who want to learn English and then take their skills even further, because now they go for citizenship and computer skills and everything. But I taught the first year. The first year people who time they came.
Yes.
And it was a joy. But,
how rewarding.
Yeah, I should have gone on longer, but I was getting pneumonia a lot then, so I decided.
Well, no, you don't really need to. I mean, you've worked more for the city and the community, let me say, than most people have in a work
I
for
really
pay
don't
job.
do very much. I do a spot thing for a committee, I'm still on the honorary board at NCJW and make some of the meetings during the year, not all of them. And I'm so happy. One of my cousins is going to be president next year. She's married to a cousin, and I think you've heard the expression Ladora Badora. I was president during the 50th anniversary, and she will be president during the 100th anniversary of NCJW.
That's so exciting. Who is that?
Her name is
That's okay. We'll come back to it.
Robin, and Robin is the daughter-in-law of Ida Ann Goldman's wife. So she's married to.
It is. That is very exciting.
Robin's wife.
Very exciting. I would like to go back to some of the things that you can remember about early Dallas. I am intrigued because you really spent most of your life in Oak Cliff. And
Well, not married. We moved to North Dallas, but my growing up years, you're right. But my interviewer also lived in Dallas.
well, I know that, but you had different experiences.
I know. People I've heard in the East talk about anti-Semitism. There was no overt anti-Semitism. I never experienced any in my entire life.
Even though you were the only Jew at Sunset High School?
Never.
What about your brothers and your siblings? Weren't they at Sunset?
No, Phil graduated from, Phil and Ethel went to Forest High School. And I started there, but I was still living in Oak Cliff, and my mother, we told her a big story. We told them I lived at a cousin Annette's house. And so I went in bread trucks to Forest High. Or whatever. And really, when the war came on, World War II, it did seem nonsense, so they told me I had to transfer, which I did.
Let me ask you something. You mentioned that your father was originally in banking.
No, baking.
Baking. Oh, I didn't
Baking
know.
bread.
Yes.
Sunbeam, Holston, Cliff Made, whatever, butter or something.
That grew into a very, very large
Goldman,
business.
kept some of the Goldman label.
Yes.
No, always baking.
Yeah, I can still remember the trucks coming around too. So there was no overt anti-Semitism, which is pretty amazing.
We knew we were not going to be in the junior league. Then we knew we could join the Dallas Country Club. But there were stories that Dad told that I think were very interesting. The Dallas Athletic Club did not take Jews at one time. Y'all remember the Dallas Athletic Club. It had a big structure downtown Dallas with hotel, and I was married there. And ballrooms and swimming pools, etc., athletic equipment. And in 1929, they had a little financial setback, as did the rest of the country. And they called my father in and they said, would you like to join? If you bring in 4 or 5 people, and we know they're your friends, we will be glad for you to have a free membership. So he did, and that was the end of the anti-Semitism there.
Anything else that you can remember, Anita, that you want to tell us about was there any difference between, let's say, Charles was from, where did you say?
Rural Mississippi.
Rural Mississippi. So there was no particular customs that he brought in that...
Yeah. I learned to eat black-eyed peas and cornbread, and it took me years to convince him you had to lock the doors. He always left the garages unopened, which we went into our kitchen or front door unlocked. And he finally did learn that there is crime in this world. Actually being Jewish in rural Mississippi was very interesting. You should ask him about that sometime.
Indeed, I know somebody else who was raised in rural Mississippi, and there's some very interesting stories.
Well, he was born in Clarksdale, but he grew up in Jonestown.
But we're talking about you and what happened here in Dallas.
Oh, what happened in Dallas? Well, let's see. We rode streetcars when I was a child. We went to the movie for 10 cents. And you could buy a Milky Way for a nickel. And
we stayed all day at the movie theater too. You wouldn't just go in.
You stayed all day. In fact, sometimes when I was a teenager, we used to go downtown. I'd meet my friend Rosalie, and we'd have lunch at the DAC, and then we'd go to 2 movies. Different Palace or Majestic or whatever was playing. And I grew up to be a great movie fan. I still love movies.
Anita, you have such a large family. Tell us about some of your family reunions.
Oh, they're really remarkable. Our youngest cousin, well, next to the youngest, Ida Ann's wife, gets all the cousins together every month for a luncheon. And then we have periodic dinners. And then when the 100th anniversary came up of the arrival of the original patriarch of the family, it wasn't our generation, or the older, well, we are the older generation, but it was my son and Louis Wright, her son, who decided that they would plant, and they called in people from all the families. It's a very big family. We don't see each other. We don't know all of each other. And most of them live in Dallas, but not all of them. But they came. The ones from out of town all came. And I met little cousins that I didn't know existed. And it was wonderful. About 170 people showed up.
Well, that's like running a small convention for him.
And it was just wonderful. It really was. And I found it very heartwarming. And each family wrote a history, 1-page history, and sent the pictures, and they were in a book which was published by my remarkable cousin Julie Melendi, who is a genius with this sort of thing. But all the people that her generation, my daughter, all of them worked to some degree in it. Databasis was my niece. I don't know what that even means. In Oklahoma City, and they came from Michigan and Oklahoma City and New York, Oregon, Houston. But the rest of them all lived in Dallas.
What a legacy for it.
It was wonderful.
And your father's legacy very muchly lives on through you and your children.
Well, it does, and as it does for my cousins and their parents, because they were all, very good people, every one of them.
Let's take a break now and see whether...
You don't have...
Okay, Anita, tell us about your siblings, tell us about your family. I noticed some wonderful photographs in your hall. Would you give us an idea of what they're all about?
Certainly, I'd be glad to. This one is the only photograph we have of my mother's parents.
And so typical of that day when nobody smiled. I mean, nobody.
It was taken from a Goodman family picture and blown up and whatever. And that's the only photograph we have of them.
And where were they from?
Poland.
Poland. Okay.
Oops.
But it's quite large and very impressive.
Well, I think it mentioned.
She is a beautiful woman.
Right.
Well, this is a photograph of my mother's engagement picture at the age of 16. Her family wouldn't let her marry till she was 17, but this was her engagement picture.
Very beautiful.
She was a beautiful woman. She really was.
Yes.
And
you
thank you
said
for saying so.
You said very quiet.
She was a woman who was dedicated to home and family, and she did some things for the congregation Sheriff Israel when she was asked, and she admired tremendously women who worked in the community. She just thought, oh, she didn't have time or wouldn't know how, and she really admired women who did.
Do you think that she knew what a dynamo she was marrying at that age? How old was he? You said she was quite a bit younger.
Yeah, than my father. Can you stop? My father in their wedding clothes.
Oh, look at that. How lovely. Let me have
In
that.
1918.
Bring this up to the camera
Thank
so
you.
that you can see
Perfect,
it.
perfect.
Can you see this?
Yes.
Very, very lovely. Very lovely.
The story is my father saw her at a dance or a wedding, I think it was. And he said to his friend, that's the girl I'm going to marry. And mother said he had to court her because she really wasn't interested in him. And they were married a little over 35 years, but she died young. She was not. She died on my birthday and was buried on her birthday at the age of 53. But they had a very good marriage. And I was one, as I said, of 4 children. My older brother, Phil, who never married, was the maverick of the family and the most fun when you get right down to it. He worked with my father. He also had an art gallery. And he had photography was his interest. He loved to travel. And he adored the children in our family. It's like having 2 fathers. Every one of my children and my Larry's children feel that about him. He was wonderful to all of them and their children.
In his later life, he lived with you.
He lived with me almost 20, 30 years off and on. And frankly, we all got along great. And I think that that's because Charles grew up in a house where the grandmother was widowed, and so his father had to assume the responsibility for the family. And there were 3 unmarried sisters and his mother. So that's the house he grew up in.
And they 3 unmarried.
Oh, wait a minute, and a brother, I forgot.
And they all lived together in Mississippi.
And in the same house, the 2 of the sisters died rather young. One was a teacher and got something that people don't die of, like scarlet fever. And the brother went off to be a lawyer. I mean, he was a lawyer, got his degree in Mississippi and practiced in Chicago. And the other sister stayed with the family until she died. In fact, she lived longer than her brother. And her sister-in-law, my mother-in-law, took care of her until she died, which is a remarkable woman. And then she moved here, so we had her for a number of years here in Dallas.
We did that. I mean, it was done a lot more in those days than it is now.
Anyhow, we thoroughly enjoyed Phil. He kept urging me to go to Brazil because he was stationed there during the war, and he went back on a cruise once, and he just loved South America. Now, my sister Ethel was just beautiful. She was just the most wonderful, gentle, kind, wonderful woman. You know, there are people with this perfect oval face and auburn hair. She was just, I thought, gorgeous. Not vain at all, never vain. And she went to the University of Texas and majored in dramatics. She was very good. We used to go down for her curtain club plays. And then she came back to Dallas. There was no job in that. And very soon she married a man from Tulsa, Morrisville. And had 2 little girls, and she died when she was almost just turned 32.
Oh,
And the little girls, I promised her, they came down every summer and spent the summer with us until they were out of high school.
good heavens. That's
So-
much too early for somebody
Yeah,
to be.
it was, and they still suffer from it. But we were all here for the reunion, and the one from Oklahoma City we see often, and we talk at least once a week, perhaps more.
That's remarkable and very sweet of you.
No, it wasn't at all.
And then that's 3 of you. Us.
And then comes Brother Larry, the adored baby of the family. He's 5 years younger than I used to try to introduce him as my older brother, but I finally had to stop. Too many people know how old I am, so I couldn't get away with it anymore.
Larry was my first date.
I heard about the camera.
Yes.
Your mother took pictures.
My mother took pictures and he brought me the world's largest carnation corsage. It went from my wrist to my elbow.
It must have been, you must have been going to a dance.
Oh yes, absolutely. He was asked to take me. It was not that he asked me, but he's wonderful too.
We see Larry all the
Now
time.
tell us about your children, yours and Charles's children.
Well, Charles and I will have been married 60 years next October, and he's remarkable for an old guy who's got all the physical problems. I call him the old warrior. He just won't give in to anything, so he just keeps going. And we have 2 children, Fraser, who lived 23 years in England and moved back to Dallas with his wife. He has a son by older son by his first wife, who is a sophomore at Carnegie now, Mellon, Austin, who also spent a great deal of time here when he was younger because his father lived in England, and he came here for visits, or for long visits in summer here, and during all the Jewish holidays. So his father would, actually, a lot of the Jewish holidays he went to London. He flew back and forth by himself at a very young age.
It's very interesting the way that Fraser's upbringing was very strongly Jewish, and so he
Very strong.
was able to keep that up in London and with his children.
Yeah, Fraser was involved at World Congress. It was going to be international something president when he left, and head of his synagogue and a few other things. He knew every rabbi in London. Everyone. And he really was. I always am amazed by my 2 children, who I read Hebrew very haltingly. And if I can remember, I don't read it anymore. But Carolyn and David can daven like professionals. They're both wonderful, and they're both very committed.
And Carolyn is your daughter.
Carolyn is my daughter, and she grew up in Dallas and graduated from Denver University. Fraser went to Dartmouth College, which is in New Hampshire. And Carolyn went to the University of Denver, where she graduated in hotel and restaurant management, which she did for about 3 years, so she figured out there was no life, working weekends and nights. And I says, why don't you go out on a date with somebody, work with a lot of guys? And her answer was, well, I won't tell you. They don't date girls, in other words. So she figured it out, and she came home, and we had a very nice trip. She and I went to Israel and to Italy, and then she went to work for my brother, who needed somebody. He had retired from the bread business and was in, what would you call it, wholesale or selling restaurants, meat and other things. So that's what she
Also,
did.
food broker or something
I
like
don't think it
that.
was a broker. They sold stuff to restaurants. So she liked the food business, and when that business closed, Larry ran it for a while, gratis, after Phil died. And then it became really apparent that it should be closed, so they did. Honorably, I should say, too, at that point. And Carolyn immediately went to work for another food company. And then came the downturn. And She was in insurance, but she's lately just taken a job with another food company because she loved the food business. She was brought up in it.
Wonderful. And she has a son.
She has a son who is 15 years old named Sam. Red curly hair, who promised he's getting a haircut tomorrow. We went to Fossil Rim Wildlife Refuge this past week, and I told him the sheep were going to grab him and make him one of them. He says, there are no red-haired sheep. But I was getting it cut this week. He goes to junior high. Next year he'll go to either Richardson or...
So you are the matriarch of a good-sized family.
Yeah, I will tell you, there was a lot of merit to working professionally. People know you can't get away to run the carpool, take them to the whatever, entertain them, go to the grocery, whatever. Be babysit, take them on a trip with you.
Gives you a lot of excuses.
Yeah, but it's nice though. I'd rather be with them without.
Absolutely.
Very fond of my family.
And they have obviously enjoyed being in Dallas. So
Yeah, it's a good city, don't you think? I mean, it certainly has a lot of faults, and you know, it's not exactly your ideal weather. On the whole, I'd rather be in Alaska. Well, it's too cold there.
Well, yes, but just think of the days in the spring and the fall, too.
Yeah.
And the winter.
Yeah, that's true.
So, can you think of anything else that we should know that you want people to be able to look at this tape and think about your basic philosophy of life? You're living a good life. You have lived a good life. You are still. What do you attribute it to?
Well, I don't know. I think you're exaggerating, but thank you. It just was an obligation. My father always felt, and my mother strongly agreed with him, that if you take from a community, you give back. And so he was active in both Jewish, he was president of the synagogue and other things. He raised money for the Methodist hospital, he was the principal, whatever. And he did the Jewish thing, but I'm saying he did both. And mother was very proud of that. So it was a motivation. And I just like to be able to change things that weren't right. And mostly that is what motivated me. I get angry at injustice. Now I don't do much about it except get angry. But it does make you get involved if you think you can change things or make it better.
And you obviously have. And so,
well, to a certain extent, yes, I'm proud of what happened, what we did. It was a joint effort. There were organizations as diverse as AFL-CIO and Junior League and Council of Jewish Women and Church Women United and all sorts of agencies and individuals. They all.
I would say that you have a history to be very proud of, and I thank you so much for letting us come and interview you. You've been just wonderful.
Well, may I thank you both for being so patient and delighted that you would listen to all this boring information.
Thank you, Anita.
Thank you.